Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 47 of the Hot Path Show. Today, I'm joined by a couple special guests here, a couple NIMRODS. We're gonna be interviewing these two guys, Chris and Kevin, about their game called NIMRODS. And this game is built with Unity's entity component system. It actually originally was not built with Unity ECS at all. So I think there's a lot of interesting topics to discuss in that. But before we get too deep into things, let's just do a quick little introduction of each of you guys. So, Chris, we'll go ahead and start with you. Just let us know, who you are, what types of things that you do at the company, and all that. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. My name's Chris. Kevin and I run 5amp together for some time. Most of it, it's a small studio. I think there's only 6 of us total, so we're kind of wearing every hat. But primarily, development is mostly what I focus on. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, great to have you here. And then Kevin, how about yourself?
Yeah. I currently reside in Austin. Me and Chris, we started 5amp about 10, 11 years ago, and went from in person to remote, and we've learned a lot of good lessons over the time. Just looking at everything back just from back then, we've grown so much. And then for me, focus on performance, focus on marketing, indie dev, so a lot of different things, but primarily on dev, but performance. So a lot of the ECS stuff too.
Awesome. Yeah, I think this is going to be a really good chat because, again, you guys have been in the indie games space for quite a while now. And I know a lot of people watching, they're, kind of smaller developers and, kind of want to build up their studio and everything. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things to say, just, kind of on the, topics of building a company in the indie game space. And then, of course, we're going to get into a bunch of fun technical stuff related to, specifically your game, NIMRODS. So, yeah, I just kind of wanted to start things out, talking a little bit about your studio history. You mentioned you guys have been around for about 10 or 11 years now. You said you started off in person, so I kind of want to know, what some of the early days were like. How did you guys get started, and what types of projects were you guys working on in the beginning?
Yeah. Totally. I could give a quick just background. We're always interested in building projects, and I think both Kevin and I at the time were working corporate. We're working Intel on microprocessors and operating systems and whatnot, and we specifically wanted to build something, so we just started kind of as a hobby doing game dev. And one of our first projects, we landed on Unity, and then it's been pretty much Unity ever since. But we built a small mobile game. It's called Pickcrafter. It was kind of Minecraft meets a clicker game, or a cookie clicker, or an incremental game that plays itself. But it just kept growing and growing into more and more features and different stuff. We threw that out just to kind of get a project under our belt and secure try and move our way into. It resume built something in games so that we could kind of grow our career in that path. It worked out, but then the game kept growing, and I remember just calling Kevin. It's dude, we got to do something. It's getting bigger, and so we're like, okay, let's take a week off of work, and let's just see if we can get a year's worth of work done. Obviously, that didn't work.
Straight game
we holed
jam.
up in his house and just pizzas and got a ton of stuff done, but. It wasn't long after that as the game continued to grow, we had to take a moment. It's are we going to do this or not? So we just jumped ship and went full time. So we've always been very indie, very bootstrap, and
I was wondering because from that game, it's using it as a resume booster so we could get into interviews.
All right.
Chris went into Facebook for games, and then I joined Gearbox.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, so it was just one of those things where a lot of the interviews are oh wow, we actually really like this prototype that you've done. It's oh yeah. Then we released, and that was where it was very bittersweet, because it's working on Battleborn and all your colleagues, but you can't ignore this thing that's growing, and you're okay. We would always I remember Chris and I talked about it. It would always be the thought of okay, what would happen if we didn't do this? So. But yeah, those were good. I mean, we still jam today too. But I remember, back then it was wake up, work for 12 hours, 16 hours, pizza, energy drink, repeat.
That's
those are some of the most fun. We do tons of game jams just to this is how NIMRODS started. Was like we were all working on a bunch of different prototypes, and that was one of them. That usually is how we stair step.
Gotcha. So it sounds like that initial kind of mobile project that you made, you said that kind of allowed you to leave the current jobs that you're working at, but then you moved into other game dev jobs after that.
No, so we went full-time 5-amp after that.
Okay.
And then we stayed kind of for because it's been there's a ton of history there, but it's mostly mobile games at that point. That was kind of our bread and butter. But we started porting all those games also to Steam and desktop. We had them on web too, and so that was kind of our experience getting into desktop like class development. But it was porting mobile games over. And there was a lot of interesting games we made in that time. I think like something that always goes through our function is like, or like how we approach the next game is like, it's got to be some new challenge that we haven't done before, like never done a multiplayer game, or we've never done, a game with,
Nice,
or even couch co-op or something like that. It's like, there's got to be a stair step. And so this next one was like NIMRODS itself was our first, like, desktop first, like premium PC game. And so that's been a huge amount of fun to kind of make that transition. And then like, if we didn't have to consider how to free to play something, it opens up a lot of other energy that we can spend on just making the game as fun as possible, where, in the past, there's been a lot of things to juggle and balance with monetization and whatnot, but it's pretty refreshing to just there's a price tag, and like, if the game's fun, it's
Yeah, because after our first game hit, like we were doing updates for it, and then we started working on new mobile titles because we're like, we don't want to be a one-trick pony. But every single mobile game that we released after that, it was like we thought of it at the beginning of like, oh, we made one successful mobile title, we'll do it again. And then the second one was like a big learning lesson of like, oh, this is tougher than what it looks like. And
like it's even though you had success with the first game, success isn't guaranteed with the next kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The second mobile game we made was a hyper casual. So
okay,
it was a big slap in the face. But we've learned a lot. Like every title, we're grateful for all the learnings that come with it, whether it's like performance or just marketing or like audience. So
improve our tech stack too. Like we always bring it forward to the next game.
Nice.
A bunch of core components. Yeah.
And so how many, I guess, including NIMRODS, how many games have you guys released?
Pitcrafter, Doggo, Coffee Craze, Merge Crafter, and then now NIMRODS. So it'd be 5. And then NIMRODS still early access. So then, we'll hopefully this year we're targeting 1.0.
So I'm kind of curious, it sounds like a lot of the games that you're making you're kind of launching into crowded spaces. You're launching into a mobile market, doing a, kind of Minecraft clone, this kind of like an idle game that, those seem to be quite popular genres. You mentioned you did a hyper casual game. Now you're doing a survivors type game. So is there kind of any, learnings maybe that you have kind of, allowed you to stay successful, even though you're launching into some of these more crowded spaces?
I think part of it is that, so if our Super Doggo, or our second game, which is Super Doggo Snack Time, and then our third game, which is Coffee Craze. Coffee Craze was like an idle game that was with coffee. Those were kind of like reskins. It really didn't add to the genre. But then our fourth title, we were like, hey, what if we did like a 3D merge game with these unique twists to it? Like really add to the genre. And we feel like Merge Crafter, that was our fourth title. We started on mobile and we released that one on Steam. That one did, it exceeded our expectations. And we believe that we really added to it, because a lot of the good, unique game ideas are like, hey, A plus B. Like, hey, we have like, you look at other previous games, it's like, I don't know, Doom was like, or I guess anything post, like Half-Life was Doom plus this combined. So something that really added to the genre. So even with NIMRODS, the idea that we came up with it is that, hey, what if we did like the Survivor, like Vampire Survivors, but we add in GunCraft? So like that Call of Duty gunsmithing, or the gun parts from Enter the Gungeon, like mixed with Vampire Survivors. So something that's more than just a reskin, something that really adds to it.
Yeah,
that's what we really feel like.
Yeah, you're doing something to kind of push the genre forward and using that as kind of a way to stand out. Like you kind of know that, this is maybe a crowded space, but there's kind of like, something positive to that, people like those types of games. but then you're like, hey, you know, how can we kind of separate ourselves and kind of like make it a little more interesting?
Yeah, and it's more fulfilling too. Like,
Oh, totally. Yeah.
so like ever since Mergecraft, we kind of like brought it back to the roots and like, hey, let's make a game that we want to play. So same thing with NIMRODS. We're like,
a lot of back and forth and iteration too. Originally with NIMRODS, like the prototype, it had always been that gun crafting element from the get-go, but then it grew and grew and grew. And a lot of that motivation was exactly what we were covering. Like it's like, are we differentiated enough in the space? Are we just going to be like, oh, cool, you guys made that, but then there's guns instead of magic items? Like if that's only like if that's what we get labeled as, that it probably won't succeed as much as if it's like, you know, oh, it's this game plus that game. So like the map was just an arena to begin, kind of like Brotato, and then it grew into like a handcrafted custom map that you're exploring, and it becomes a huge part of the play style, to just like uncover all the areas in the map and see what it has, and then enemies and bosses and like then the airdrop came in, and then the drone partner itself. Like I'd say our three biggest points are like the guns, then the drone, like you get to play with your previous run. So you do that roguelite, but like most of them, you just throw it away. So that came out of like, kind of like we have the gun serialized and it's like an entity rather than like it's not an entity in ECS, but like just like a state of like all the parts together that felt like an object that we could like, how can we utilize that in the game? And we went through a ton of different kind of ideas and tried them out, and then kind of landed on this one where it's like, well, it's just going to be half of your damage. So every time, you know, the meta loop of the game is just improving that gun that you're taking with you. And so it's a bit more interesting than just putting in like points into a static system.
What I remember too, it was like, oh, this should take us like 6 months to do. Yeah. Like that's what we initially ballparked it. And we're like 2 years later, I think that's every indie game.
Yeah. So I guess, you know, what do you kind of attribute to being able to stay in business for so long, even through some of these more maybe challenging times where you launch a game and it isn't as successful as you would like it to be? Like, are there any kind of lessons that you can kind of pull from that?
I'd say one aspect is just we've always been bootstrapped and like basically like we don't grow with the intention of like, okay, we're gonna have to find that revenue in order to justify that growth. It's like we've kind of grown to a comfort level, and the like the runway exists such that we can make a safe like growth vector like higher and increase the team size. But we also support like those existing games, and there's definitely a big part of just what's keeping us running is those previous successes. So keeping those alive with updates and stuff like that is critical, and like just maintaining the bottom line for us. So to some degree, it's like luck that the previous like games like panned out to allow us to make the next games. But yeah.
But also, it sounds like you're not like overextending yourselves. Like, you know, you have some success and you're not like, oh, okay, let's, you know, hire on 100 people for our next game.
Oh, yeah. Or if we took on investors or something like that, and it'd be like, all right, where's the, you know, you got this much time to deliver. And if that game doesn't hit, which like hitting game after game after game, like, it's very difficult to do that and also like enjoy it. Like you're doing something new and interesting. I think that's something that like has been a really fun, like to keep it fun and interesting is we're always trying a new challenge, but it also adds a complexity where like if we had a like a formula that works, you could just, you know, a lot of studios kind of continue to use that formula. Like, oh, we're going to build a sequel, or we're going to build another one, or we're going to use everything we have to build a second version of this game. But that also can get, it's not as fun as like, we're going to try something completely different. And, but that comes with a lot of risk too. So.
I think also too, it's just really like learning from our previous titles. I mentioned that briefly, where like learning from the failures too, because I remember like for our third game, and I've seen other indie devs do this too, where like our third game, the metrics, we released it into like mobile for early access on Google Play and Apple, but the metrics weren't looking good. We weren't getting that much of an audience. I don't believe that there was an audience there, but we were just so determined to like make it work. We didn't want to call it quits. So like 6 months pass, 8 months pass, 1 year passes, and then it was like, okay, we can't really be doing this forever if the metrics aren't going to improve. So just kind of like knowing when to kind of move on, just be like, hey, you know, learn from this, go to the next one. Because I get it, like to just throw years away of effort.
Kind of the sunk cost fallacy, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What are kind of some of the factors that like heavily played into you know, maybe canceling a project or kind of moving on from it?
I think
just of growth or success, I think mostly. But
yeah, I know other studios or like larger ones like Supercell, like they could work on a game and put millions of dollars in it, and then if they don't like the metrics, they just cancel it. It's like we can't really cancel a game. Like,
yeah.
Because we're too small, and it's like, okay, well, we already invested. Let's at least you know, check it out. But
try and get something out of it still.
Yeah. But we also like to see like, hey, let's have a new game release. Let's at least try to extrapolate the numbers and just see. Let's give it at least some time. And like a lot of times, you could probably see the writing on the wall like before you release. So with NIMRODS, like we really push a lot for the marketing, and I think that that's what really helped NIMRODS. Like not only was it a fun game, but I think it's our most marketable title that we've spent in terms of time, in terms of reaching out to influencers, the whole thing. And I think that's what really helped with NIMRODS.
Awesome. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I want to talk a lot more about NIMROD specifically, but I'm also kind of curious, you know, you mentioned that, you know, you had some older successful games that you were able to, you know, keep putting resources towards to kind of like extend their life. So what do you kind of like attribute that to? Like, is there kind of been like a lot of like community building around some of those games, or like how have you been able to, you know, find kind of longer term success out of some of your earlier games?
Yeah, there's Discords like that is our primary kind of community thing. They kind of built themselves up on there, but then that's been definitely the like where they continue to play the game. They share it and they do all kinds of like we engage with the community and do like competitions or stuff like that.
Cool.
But
it's kind of chicken and the egg thing too, because with Pitcrafter, it was like the idle Minecraft inspired game. That one, when we released it, I think we were just there, right time at the right place, and to the point where we ranked high on the algorithm, and then we developed the community because of how many downloads we were getting. Like right now, if you search for Pickaxe on App Store or on Google Play, like ours is in like 1 or 2 top. So
nice.
So I think that's what really helped the first game, and then we just kind of been like utilizing this community, like just, you know, hey, we have a new game that's coming out, and do a lot of cross promotion too.
Beta testing, like we've gotten a huge amount of support. Like it's also helped the development. So there's a give and take that's like just awesome. Like in localizing our game in general, it's a huge like cost or just investment, but we've always had the community help us like improve the translations or do them from the start to reach more like geos.
That's awesome. Cool. Are there any other kind of things that you might want to talk about some of your early days of the studio before we move into some more NIMROD specific stuff?
I mean, one thing too, I know Chris talked about it just a little bit, but like I think mobile, nowadays I feel like mobile is very crowded. It probably still has room for like some solo devs, but right now it's just dominated by like people who do a lot of ad spend on it. And then you also have to worry about like, because I know a lot of people say like, hey, if you're making a free to play title on mobile, like, or if you're making a premium game on mobile, like you should pivot and do a free to play because that's what makes sense. Well, that's what a lot of people have said. But for us, like pivoting over to NIMRODS, it was like a breath of fresh air because with Mergecrafter, it's like, oh, we made this feature too fun. Oh, we got to put some gates, we got to put some things behind it because in the end, like we at least want to keep afloat. We want to make sure that
absolutely, yeah.
So it's like a little bit of balance. I think on the spectrum, we've always been on that side of like, hey, you can achieve a lot of things in the game without having to spend. But with NIMRODS, it's a lot better because, hey, let's just make this the most fun game that we can. Like, no more having to worry about monetization.
If you do multiplayer, you can do free to play, I think, kind of in a nice way. But if you're doing a completely solo experience, it's kind of difficult to do anything other than you're paying for progress or you're paying for time. So designing that game becomes like a little bit of like,
I remember, had a professor who was kind of talking about some of like the, game design that goes into, some of these kind of freemium type games where, they kind of have this term called like fun pain, right? Where you kind of like give the player a bunch of fun, they're having a good time and all this. And then you kind of give them, like some pain points, some kind of blocker, and then, give them some way to, maybe pay some money to kind of get through that. So it kind of like shifts your kind of like game design to, like you're saying, kind of incorporate a little bit of those things in, because, like you guys say, you guys have to, earn money if you want to keep continuing making fun games.
Yep.
The amount of psychologists that are employed in the games
it's insane. And actually, so what was like your experience like porting over some of your mobile games? You said that you kind of had some of these mobile games and you brought them over to Steam. Were you kind of keeping a similar business model, or were you kind of doing more of like a traditional, like, pay once and have the game?
We considered that definitely for MergeCrafter as well, because that one like had more of it fit more, like it could be on Steam as a premium game. But for the most part, that like Steam does implement the in-app purchase transaction kind of workflow or microtransactions. So we just it was more focused on like what was the tech undertaking and like how much different like UI to make it landscape and scale and everything like that, and porting over all the other systems and cloud save and stuff like that to make sure that they work. But we saw ourselves constantly having to fight that. It's like, oh, do we maintain this? Because the feedback on Steam is just a completely different audience, and they don't take quite as easily to free-to-play design. So it wasn't as easy to make it fit perfectly.
I think the technical part of it, I mean, Unity made it like way easier to build for desktop than Google Play or Apple, but it's just we just kept it free to play. We're like, okay, but then that's when we saw like how big Steam is. We're like, oh, okay, Pitcrafter, we ported it to Steam. MergeCrafter, we ported it to Steam. Like, these are great platforms because it also can help build the community.
Yeah, and it's a new audience too. Like a lot of the people who are very hardcore into Steam, finding those like very niche indie titles, they're not necessarily the type of people who are like, looking around for random mobile games to play, right?
Right. And I think right now it's kind of changing too, because Steam did introduce that trending free. I know it's like for demos, but also I've seen a lot of free to play games there too, which that didn't exist when we released MergeCrafter or Pitcrafter, but it was harder to find the free-to-play games. You had to be filtering for the free-to-play games. But this one, you can actually get on trending.
Interesting. All right. Well, shall we transition to talk a little bit about NIMRODS here?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Cool. I think before we do that, I can go ahead and play your guys' trailer just to give people a little bit of idea about what NIMRODS is. So I'll pull that up here. Well done. Awesome trailer. So yeah, I think the trailer gives a pretty good idea about what the game is. But I mean, do you guys just want to give your kind of elevator pitch on the game? Who's got the best elevator pitch?
Kevin did this more than I did. Kevin went to like most of the conventions. I think I joined him for a few of the big ones, but
okay. It's been a while since I've done a pitch, since October. But yeah, so with NIMRODS, NIMRODS is a survivor-like. If you haven't heard of survivor-likes, it's like Vampire Survivors. It's like a horde shooter. But with our game, we wanted to be a lot different than what's out there. It's definitely a crowded space. A lot of reskins have came out. So how can we differentiate ourselves? So what we did with the game is that we added 3 unique concepts to it. The first one is that whenever you deploy, you're a guns tester, or you're a gun tester for a weapon manufacturer. So you get deployed to the planet, and every time that you level up, you get to pick a new gun part for your gun chassis. And everything combines and works together. And that's the main thing that we have, is that there's so many different gun builds to try. We even see people show off gun builds and we're like, hey, that's really cool. I didn't know about that, but I'm glad it doesn't crash. And then the second thing that we wanted to do is that, like, hey, we have this gun crafting system. This is great, but what else is there to do around the map? Vampire Survivors, they have like the kind of repeatable tile of the world, but we wanted to really lean into the world exploration. So there's a huge handcrafted map with a lot of different secrets, a lot of different unlocks to do.
Cool.
So there's a big element for exploration. And then the last one, which is probably the most unique out of the genre, is that, like other roguelikes, if you have a really crazy run, what do you have to show for it? Maybe an achievement, maybe a video recording or something. But in our game, since your run is the gun, once you die, your gun gets taken back to your home ship. And then from here, you could give it to your drone. You could do different things with it in the home ship. You could put it on like your weapon rack, like kind of like a 007 type of thing, or Mission Impossible. Or you could give it to your drone. Your drone comes with you on the next round, and levels up, uses your gun, but starts at the level 0, and then levels up at the same time that you did on that run. So it allows you to kind of ideate different synergies from your previous gun.
That's super unique. I like that a lot. Yeah, that definitely, sets it apart from a lot of the kind of just off the shelf Survivors clones. I think there's a lot of really interesting aspects in there, like exploring the world, creating the gun. I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there. So I guess, why did you want to make a Survivors-like game? And, was that kind of like, it sounds like you had learned from your previous game to kind of like differentiate yourself from some of these kind of main games. I think, is that kind of like one of the early goals of yours, is like, okay, we want to make this Survivors-like, how can we differentiate it? Is that kind of like the thinking?
So it was, we were at a point in time where we were doing a lot of like hack weeks in the company, and we're like
game jams. Yeah.
Just kind of like figuring out what you're going to do next, sort of thing.
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 prototypes. We had like a full-blown survival, like it was like Waterworld, but like mixed with and it was multiplayer and everything. It was going to be crazy. And then we had NIMRODS like as well, like an early prototype of that one, which is like, what could we do in this space? This is interesting, and we could probably get to market quicker or get something out.
Yeah, because this is kind of similar. I see the comment where it says, are you careful not to try and build a game that's too big to fail? And that kind of goes along that same point, because the fact that this other game, which was multiplayer and survival, that could take us if NIMRODS was estimated to take 6 months and it took 2 years, this one estimated 2 years could take 6 years or something.
Yeah.
So we were like, okay, it's definitely a risk, but the other idea of like, okay, well, Survivor-like with gun crafting, let's give this a shot. And we were like, all right, well,
like just from a scope perspective, that just seemed a little bit more manageable.
Right.
Yeah, it's still scaled out of control.
Yeah, of course.
If we kept it as like trim scoped, it's very likely it wouldn't have stood out, or it wouldn't have done very well. But we just kept like leaning into what it wanted to kind of become, like different iterative approach to get there. Yeah.
And so, what was kind of the early developments of NIMRODS like once you kind of decided on this project? You know, how did you, I mean, you just kind of started prototyping things out in Unity because that's what you guys had already been using. Is that kind of how things started?
Yeah, we were. I remember it started off with prototyping in Unity mainly, but not even using ECS, just game objects, and we wanted a whole bunch of different like. We call them modifiers, and we still call them modifiers, but we use like different asset packs for just like, hey, this is a simple top-down view. Let's just try to get as much code as possible, and just really trying to like kind of get this as a build, so we could just kind of start the play testing phase. But with this one too, there's also some design iteration because having 6 guns in your inventory and you had to like swap between each one of them, you know, that was a lot. So we're like, how about we just center it down to like one gun, and this is the gun that you upgrade, and this is what the game is about. So there's a lot of like important iterations, and then even with the as Chris mentioned,
it was
earlier,
even multiplayer at one point. Like there was we had like one game jam week.
I totally forgot about that.
Kevin actually kept this completely like under wraps, and then he was like, "All right, everybody, open unit like on the team. We're in a voice chat together." And he's like, all right, hit this like, or input this special like key combination to open the multiplayer menu. And then we all got to zone in together and actually play the game. It didn't it worked, but it was all over the place. It was hilarious. But there was a road, or there's a different timeline where NIMRODS was multiplayer first. But
it just really showed that you have to like redo the game, like code the game twice type of thing. We're like, okay, this is going to be huge. This is going to be very similar scope to Waterworld. So let's
which is our survival kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But that was but also like other design iterations too, like Chris mentioned, where it was like a Brotato type of map at the beginning. And you know, we were close to saying like, all right, let's wrap this up, let's kind of ship it here. But then that's where a lot of like internal discussion of like, well, we don't believe that this is like unique enough. Like this is not gonna make a splash.
So I guess at that point, did you kind of had some of the like gun progression mechanics figured out, but it still wasn't like, you didn't really have that like world exploration and things like that in quite yet?
Right. Yeah. Like we had enemies in, and we started building out a lot of the tech.
Did we ship an itch demo with Arena?
We did very, very, because it was like, all right, well, we need to start building a following for this game. So let's release a really early prototype as quick as possible.
WebGL and like that. It was super instrumental in us like deciding like what the milestones were and how big the scope was going to get, is to like get some pulse on how the game was resonating with players and whether it was even interesting, whether it was going to grow, or whether even the feedback was solid. So like as soon as we could get to some level that we felt like we were confident, we'd throw it up on itch and just see if like itch.io, and just see if there was like good comments coming back, or if we could get like onto the roguelike, section on the website and whatnot.
Because I remember I even talked to like a lot of other indie devs, and a lot of them can be like very secretive with their game design ideas. They're like, oh, I have a game idea, it's going to make millions, or I have a game idea and I just can't tell anybody. But like what we've seen is that like the game idea is nothing without execution. What's most important is that like you need to get that feedback, you need to get that play test as soon as possible, give it to the public. You gotta, if you come up with a unique game idea, you just gotta bet that at least maybe 5 other people have thought about the same thing.
Yeah.
But what really matters is your vision of this game and execution. So
totally, yeah.
So that's why we decided to do like itch, just like, hey, let's get it out there and let's really start iterating on it.
So yeah, what was your process for early play testing? Did you like guys kind of create some prototype and then, like you say, just put it up on itch, and like did you just kind of throw it out there, or did you like point some of your existing community to that? Like what was kind of the way of like gathering some of that initial feedback?
Yeah, we definitely pushed for itch. Austin has a pretty big game dev scene, so I would
Okay,
bring a Steam Deck and bring my laptop and kind of have other people play and just see what they like. And yeah, and that was very positive too. Just like I remember Chris came in town for one of them too. We're just getting everybody's feedback on the visual art style. What do you guys think of the game loop and things like that?
Whether they wanted to play another round, that was like the key.
Yeah.
Like, especially because if you're at like a bar and like, you know, oh cool, yeah, your game, and then you know, but
yeah, I've definitely been in the place where you see people play games and you're just like, this person just like trying to like die and just like get the game over screen as quickly as possible. You're like,
hey, cool,
I'm kind of done with this.
Yeah.
Well, totally. It's also very tough for us because the drone comes on your second run.
Oh, okay.
So like they died.
That's kind of like a crucial mechanic almost that you want people to test out.
It's like a hook, and it's like, wait a second, you haven't seen the hook yet. But that
it's like, no, play again.
Yeah. But then it's like, if people want to play again, then they can kind of like see that that next little portion of it.
Yeah, and then once they do, so many people, they have like the aha moment of like, oh, and it's like, yes,
see.
This is what we want. Yeah.
It was definitely a long iteration though, but like thinking of the first playtest, there was times where we spent just hours in a call trying to figure out the identity of the game and which inspirations or games that we played. Like, you haven't played this, oh, you must play that game in order to understand where we're gonna go or what somebody's vision on the team was. But then by the end, like the last big event we did, we went to DreamHack Atlanta and then just kind of set up as many PCs as we could, and then that was like finally felt like a really good moment. And it was the demo that we were going to ship on Steam, or we had already shipped on Steam, and just seeing people come back the next day, like it was a multi-day kind of conference or event. You'd be like, I remember that dude from yesterday, and then they sit down and play again and again. It's like, okay,
nice.
It's really working.
But they're sitting down for like several hours, like 4 or 5 hours. Like, you should tell him to like.
Yes.
So what was the kind of like development cycle like? When did you guys start developing this? Was it kind of like all hands on deck to begin with? What was kind of like the development cycle of that?
Well, I mean, during the prototype, it was still kind of like between the survival game that we had. Like, so it was kind of like split. But then that's when like the more we kept operating like with half the team, that's when like some of the design decisions, they were kind of getting iterated on. It would be great to have like the whole entire team to iterate. So that's when we made the decision of like, okay, maybe 6 months into it, we're like, all right, let's get everybody on the full project. Because then we just start moving faster, iterate faster. And then we just kept iterating for the next year and a half after that. And we released probably the demo, like a Steam demo. We had it probably 6 months after that. What do you think, Chris? Right?
Yeah, I think
so
we
you'd
targeted
say about 2 years into development from when like the early prototypes to when you guys shipped the demo.
I think 1 year. 1 year we shipped the demo on Steam because we participated in last February's Next Fest.
Okay,
which was like the third time we delayed it. They would say like, use the last Next Fest before you launch. So we would target a Next Fest and then be like, but we're not there yet. We're not like ready. So we pushed, I think, twice.
Yeah. And part of that too is that like marketing, like we don't want to release the game with no following or no wish list. And that was another crucial part too. And I've talked to other indie devs too, where they release a game and they have like 500 wish lists. And it's just so tough because
it's a real uphill battle at that point.
Yeah. So for us, we were just every single day or every week, we would like check in on our wish list, see our trend. Hey, did we get covered by an influencer? But we needed to like at least hit a mark if we even want to release.
The demo was, I would say, the most instrumental piece. Like all of our marketing is the demo. Like without the demo or how polished the demo was and how much we put into it, like we kind of, when we first finished the demo, it was honestly all we had. Like it wasn't like we had because we were doing it early to try and get the feedback, so we kind of like released most of what the game was, and then as we finished the game, the kind of where the demo mark didn't change as much, but yeah, it was instrumental, because that's when then streamers can play that demo if it's polished enough and it's actually worth their time. And there's tons of indie streamers and like people that specifically cover, like Wanderbots was a huge help. Like I think like took credit for our first like big spike was like amazing, just to get like some of those.
Attention. Yeah, we had the demo ready and released on Steam like a couple months before Next Fest, so that allowed us to just iterate, fix bugs from there.
It looks like we might have someone who checked out the demo.
Nice.
Awesome. So what was kind of the way you got most of the eyeballs on the demo? Was it from the Steam Next Fest?
So I believe right before it, there was an event that happened. I think it was like a streamer that caught wind of it right before it, and we started to see a lot of we also like reached out to influencers, press, like at least a week before.
This is all before Steam Next Fest, you mean?
Yep.
Right. We had a few booms prior to our Next Fest, which were kind of like streamers playing it, like YouTube, or at least like we could attribute the main spike to be like.
And so the demo was already publicly available at that point.
Yeah.
We had a couple iterations.
You ship it before Next Fest, but just to make sure that there's not like, you don't want to ship it on the day of and there's a bug and it's
totally.
But ours was live, I think, like long before Next Fest, because we had planned for an earlier Next Fest.
Right.
And then
and we were still doing the itch.io builds update, even though that wasn't driving as much traffic compared to Steam, but it was at least something, and we were getting feedback, bugs reporting. So it was helpful, but it was once that we released it. It was like around November when we released the demo on Steam, and then we got a big uptick, and that's probably the algorithm like trying to put our game in front of other people. And then when we hit like Steam Next Fest, that's when we saw like the biggest spikes, because I think we went into it with a lot of momentum, so we gained on that early trending games.
Yeah, you already had some numbers on your game. Like it wasn't like you're just launching that brand new, no one knew about it.
Yep.
Right. So hopefully you're in the short list, because then there's a lot more streamers during Next Fest that are like, all right, we're playing indie demos or demos in general. It doesn't have to be indie, and they can only play so many. It feels like there's thousands of demos in Next Fest now. So,
did you find that during Next Fest you guys ended up getting covered by a good amount of streamers and things like that?
We had a few standout, like Admiral Baru, I think, was one of the biggest ones that like he had like they had a list of like all the games that they wanted to play, and they played NIMRODS, and then the next day they booted up their stream, and it was like, you know what, I'm playing more NIMRODS. Like, what about the spreadsheet? It was like a really awesome moment.
That's awesome.
And I think
it feels so good.
Yeah, just from him playing one day, we got like 1,000 wishes or more.
At least, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and but we reached, like, we barely made it, but we made like the top 50 demos for our Next Fest, which was great.
Okay,
so it's
cool.
Like to be able to kind of gauge like how well did it perform during that little, during the Next Fest.
Yeah.
Steam does a little collection at the end.
And for Next Fest too, I read the comment where it says, sounds like it's mandatory thing for indies nowadays. 100%. Like, it's really hard for me to change my mind, but I've like a lot of people I've seen, they're like, I decided not to do it. It's like, why? That's free exposure.
Yeah.
Just gotta do it.
Yeah, if you don't already have some community or any kind of notoriety, like, I mean, it really seems like one of the best ways to just like, get that ball really rolling.
Yep.
And I know you had kind of mentioned before we started here that you had kind of like been doing a lot of like direct outreach to streamers. What was kind of your strategy on doing that? Were you like targeting specific people, or what was kind of your main approach to all that?
Yeah, primarily like our entire like marketing strategy for the most part. Like we didn't put specifically cash into like advertising or like traditional media or even like paid ads on any of the platforms. We're familiar with all that stuff from mobile, but like it's a little different on Steam. And like we've read a lot of other indies is like, okay, I paid this much for like cost per click or on this thing, and does it drive wish lists, and then a wish list is not a sale, all this kind of stuff. So we mostly went that kind of streamer approach and tried to outreach to them. And it's just cold emails, like sourcing them out. It was a lot of man hours and woman hours put into finding
I can imagine
just streamer emails and coming up with a really good thing, like an email with a GIF in it, and it's like, hey, come play your game. So it really comes down to is the game interesting and compelling, and then hopefully you get a few, but the conversion rate was, no matter how you cut it was tough. Yeah.
I can imagine. Yeah. So did you kind of have some general email templates, and then you would tune it specifically to certain streamers?
Yeah, for the big ones, especially the ones that we're actual fans of, we can add some texture there. But most of the, if they were ones we weren't familiar with, weren't gonna try and quickly fashion something together as if we're a fan or something. Yeah. So it was pretty generic, but it had a GIF in it. There's a bunch of really good videos I think on it too. It's how do you get how to write a cold email from creators themselves. I think Blitz had a really good thread. Wanderbots has had a really good thread, and how should you approach reaching out to streamers? And then you want to listen to streamers, not game marketers. They're not the streamers will tell you how they want to be, how they want to hear about games. There's a lot of good resources out there.
And did you kind of find any value at all in maybe reaching out multiple times? If you didn't hear back, that you would kind of follow up and maybe send a slightly different follow-up email? Did you end up finding any success doing that at all?
We did do that for sure. I do remember, there was definitely some that hadn't seen it, or not everybody has the time to respond. So they might have even seen it. It might be in their queue, or it might be on their radar, but they, not every streamer responds.
Right.
Most of them don't, even if they did read it or not. So, within reason. We definitely weren't hitting them every day, but I think if we had something unique or
little reminder a couple weeks later kind of thing.
Yeah, any kind of marketing beat we'd consider because it was also how much effort does it take to send them all. We weren't using a tool, a little worried that a tool might also put you on a spam filter or something like that versus actually sending them. Not super sure where it would land, but if we had a marketing beat, there's a new trailer, and it's a meaningful reason to read out, or there's an update to the demo, or we're planning for the next fest, or we want to share an early build. We did that a few times. Do you want to have access to the build before anybody else does, so you can make content?
And sometimes just sending them hey, here's the message. We don't expect a reply. Here's a Steam key. And sometimes they don't respond and they redeem it, and sometimes they play it. So it's great.
Yeah. And then at least that's them kind of maybe vetting things out to say, is this some game that I might want to make a video on?
Yeah. We definitely read a bunch of stuff on the Steam key sharing too. We just dropped it in the email straight up, because if you make them go through any hoops, or if you
you're expecting them to reply to you to say I want to play your game, and then you send them that email with the key, and then maybe they miss that or whatever. So
and Steam there's a portal on Steam, and you can see every key that you get generated. You can check to see if it's been redeemed and at what time, and so it's kind of interesting. You can if you sent out a bunch of keys in this style, you could still reclaim them, if you want, weeks later. It's clearly they didn't take that email or something like that. You could reuse them. That was definitely part of it.
Yeah, and then we did do a lot of different events, in-person events. Some of them were kind of local to me in Austin, where it was I'll just bring my computer and just kind of promote the game. And I think with this one too, because some of the events, they weren't that big, but the most important thing here were any of the connections or networking. If you did run into a streamer, you're oh, hey, this streamer has 20,000 followers. Great, let's set you up with a key. So, but at the same time, the priority kind of the value shifted. So within the first year of the game's development, these events were great for playtesting, but then the last half of it was more for marketing, more for exposure.
I see. And so actually, had you ended up meeting some people who are kind of influencers or things like that in person at some of these events? Because I feel like most of the like kind of more meetup events that I've gone to where I can, get feedback on, it's like, it's just like a bunch of other developers. There's not really like, content creators who are playing games or things of that nature. But I guess, has it been different at some of the events that you were at?
At the one in DreamHack, and it varies based on the size of the event.
Right. Yeah.
Like a PAX or a DreamHack or
like those are huge with influencers. I did go to QuakeCon and I set up like a sign and everything just to get more exposure to it. And we got like a handful of
open stream.
Yeah. Here. Good share. Yeah.
Here, no, I'll find it. You can talk.
Oh, wait here. I've got it right here. I think. Yeah. So like this right here. Just
that's that light up sign that you were showing me the other day, right?
Yeah. I have it here in my room. But
that's so cool.
I bought like before QuakeCon, and this was in August of last year. But before QuakeCon, I just went to the store, got like a piece of acrylic, ordered some of the LED like cuttable lights.
Yeah.
And then just like we got a banner printed, and then I was like, hey, if I'm going to go to this event, might as well just like promote this. And then we had like a little projector here with the game.
Did you just like randomly set that up, or did you like need to get permission for that, or like?
QuakeCon's kind of a vibe.
With QuakeCon, it's like everybody puts up.
Okay, like their clan. It got you.
Yeah. So I was like, well,
just straight up game marketing. That's awesome.
But like it's huge, and like NIMRODS is right back here.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you can see it with the light up sign.
Yeah, and then went to other different events. Like this one was in DreamHack, so we brought this. This is us like showing off the game, and then this was at like in San Jose at MagWest. So
okay,
another event to show it off. So a lot of different events that we went to. Some of them, I think, no matter what, all of them had their value to some extent. But like DreamHack one was huge because with that one, that's where we got. I think Jake Lucky. He interviewed me on Twitter. He just like said, "Hey, check out this this team's game," and we got a lot of like wish lists from that. So that was pretty good.
Oh, cool. So it's just kind of all just being, at these events, putting yourself open to making connections with different people, and then just kind of working with whatever comes out of it.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's a big part of it too. I feel like it's an amplifier, but you have to have something worth. Like if it has to already like it can market itself and then you can amplify it. And a lot of them are you have to go out and find them, because if you just like the one that Kevin was just mentioning with the influencer on Twitter, it's like he didn't come to us. Like Kevin tweeted at him and then he was like, oh yeah, I'm interviewing a bunch of people, and it worked out. But
yeah. So it's kind of like a combination of putting yourself out there, being available, and also like kind of reaching out and then just seeing what comes out of it.
Yeah,
that's awesome. All right, well, I kind of want to transition to talk a little bit more about some of the technical stuff here. So I guess we'd kind of been dancing around a little bit about it, but you guys kind of started prototyping this out using fully game objects and all that. So when did you kind of like start to run into issues with that? I mean, did you run into issues? I mean, I kind of assume that you might have, because you kind of wanted to switch your entire game architecture to something different. So when was kind of the point where some red flags started to go off?
Yeah, we released a demo on Steam, and a lot of people, they enjoyed the demo, but like there's this part in the demo that once you hit a certain point where a lot of people would get to it once you're far enough into it, but it just would lag like crazy. Like the frame rate was like 5-10 FPS. It was really bad. Yeah. And we looked at the architecture and we just, we spent so many weeks just kind of, hey, is there like a silver bullet here that we could just kind of resolve everything with like one change, or maybe we do something different? Like, because our prefabs, they were pulled, everything was a game object, projectiles were a game object, everything was a game object. But the way that our system works is that like you had different like triggers is what we call it. Like, let's say a projectile hits something, then we want to kind of send off like, hey, this is the trigger on projectile impact. And then we had other modifiers that said, okay, well, hey, I'm a rocket, so I need to explode. So the explosion modifier would then spawn another game object. So if you had like hundreds, if not thousands of these, everything would be happening and spawning and activating transforms, all managed code, all in one frame. So we really like looked into it, and after several weeks of trying to like find a path, the only way that we could resolve it is if we like cut design, like, hey, after X amount of projectiles, then we just stop processing them. But then, or maybe processing their hits, and that a lot of these, they have a lot of downsides too, because players might be all like, wait a second, that bullet didn't register any damage. What's going on? Or now I'm not shooting bullets completely. What's
right?
up?
You're kind of like breaking trust with your player almost.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
or
it was a really tough like decision whether we were going to compromise the design in order to like try and make the performance work, because we tried everything, like refactoring so many systems, like even we got to the point where just memory allocations, even outside of the game object land, it was like our stack controller system was, remember all the allocations and all that, and then we fixed that, and it's like, oh well, that was one, and it wasn't enough. But
so it was, because I see the comment regarding the too many colliders. So I remember the very early prototype, we had it where everything was like a rigid body and like using the default Unity physics, and that was just like no. So we got rid of that, but we're still in the game object land, and but yeah, we had a lot of allocations, like creating new lists every frame, creating new dictionaries. Just so many things were happening every frame, and it was just part of it too. It's like our previous games, we just didn't really need to squeeze this much performance out of them. And this is just kind of how like Unity teaches you, right, with their tutorials of like, you do this. And I get it. Like, if you're not spawning hundreds, if not thousands of projectiles, this could be fine.
perfect.
Right. Yeah, perfect. But you know, for our game, we're like, okay, well, we need to really figure this out. So then we started looking into like ECS. Well, I guess before that, we're like, all right, well, let's go ahead and swap all of our list calls with like maybe making our own entity component system type of thing. But then that only like lasted maybe less than a week, and
we dipped a toe too. Like there's like a few of our specific modifiers that were very math intensive, and so refactoring those, but only that system to being using the burst compiler and using jobs, but it still was completely dependent on, like, it had really no entities and no data backers, and they were still just passing the information back to game objects.
Right. You're like, yeah, the calculation is fast, but now I'm like, bringing in all this data, sending all this data back to manage land, and
yeah. So the like, I think it was like we still had to manage some list, and it just like, it's like, okay, we made part of it, but we have to convert the entire system to really yield the benefit.
Yeah, so
it broke like other stuff, like we couldn't do. I remember there was some projectile list that we couldn't.
Yeah, and it was just like everything was so intertwined with everything that, like, it was like dominoes, right? Like, when you change one thing out, you just broke.
Of course.
Still is to this day. It's
but then that's when it's like, okay, you know, so I took some weekends just to like create like a prototype of like, okay, how would entities look like?
Was ECS something kind of like already on your radar, like in general, before, like just kind of like being, I guess, familiar with what Unity is doing, or is that something that you like not really seriously even like paid attention to much?
So it's funny because I remember a lot of the Unites that we went to, like, for example, 2018, or
there was a one in Austin, right?
Yeah, like we went to the one in LA too, but we just skipped the talks where they're talking about like ECS, burst compiler, and things like that. But then now it's like we're just watching those videos like constantly, or like when we were doing the coding efforts. We're like, you know what? Back then, this would have been helpful if we went. But like, so like after a lot of Googling, a lot of research of like, how do we do this? There's a lot of forum posts just so like, and you know, not forums or not threads created by us, but a lot of people saying like, well, this is where like you need to have entities. unmanaged components. That's really how you get the most performance out of it. And it was still more of an exploration. That's why I just kind of took on the side time to be like, hey, well, can this game work out with entities? Let me just kind of do an investigation. How much time would this take? Can I at least just port like some modifiers over to ECS and we can have game objects for everything else? And so that was like the first thing that we started doing in terms of researching. And this was in like March after Steam Next Fest. So
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we had the momentum, but like we saw all these people talk about like performance issues.
Yeah, so like it's a fun game, but it runs into performance issues quickly.
Yeah.
And the demo only has like, it doesn't even get to halfway how chaotic the end game gets.
Okay.
So it was like if we're already hitting it.
Yeah.
But I think some of our, like I was thinking about it from your question, it's like some of our like the long experience that we've had with Unity might have soured some of our like our initial, like how quickly would you be willing to adopt something that Unity has in its tech branch. From all of our experience of adopting something that's like new from Unity is like you're gonna have a bad time. It's gonna be painful and it's gonna be unfinished, or it's gonna, like how long do they support it before they move on to the next version of that thing? And so usually like it's nice to wait until it's like pretty well baked and the documentation is like relatively rigid, and like the amount of like just sources you can Google, right, are there, right?
Yeah,
It's like, oh, people have solved these problems before. It usually makes it helpful. So I think with ECS, like a lot of the interest is like, oh, this is one of their new things. Like we'll explore it once it becomes like the way
more
to solve stuff.
mature.
Like,
yeah.
UI toolkit right now, it's like, yeah, but there's probably going to be a lot of gaps that don't exist, and it's like, so we'll wait when that's done. Like.
Yeah, I remember.
I think that was at least what I remember my like how I felt about it until we started using it. Was like, oh, it's one of their new things. Yeah, we'll wait. Yeah, sprite render is great. Like, just put in the channel, and that's what Kevin's like working through the past like few weeks, is converting all of our tech to use Entity graphics.
Yeah, so what we did, kept on the research of it, and then went to GDC after. I remember I talked with Laurent, the product manager at Entities, and we were just having a chat, and he still wants to host us on like a live stream in the future. So
awesome.
Get back to him. But he was talking to me. He's like, okay, I was just chatting with him about our issues and where we're at and the research into Entities, saying like, hey, we've slowly converted. And he just was asking me like, okay, are you using URP? Are you using level streaming? And I was just like writing everything down. Because we've heard about it, but we weren't really aware of like how much it could save until like a few months down the line. But then that's when, and it was tough too, because a lot of people on the team, they thought like, well, we have this big code base that we've iterated on, and like this is a good foundation, but now we have to kind of rip that apart and like start over.
How much do we have to start over? Yeah.
So yeah, I guess how did that decision come to be, where you're like, kind of experimenting with some ECS stuff on the side, and I guess what was the thing that made you say like, okay, yeah, we need to do this, for our whole game?
It was like I will say, because Kevin was convinced earlier than the rest of the team, because he did a lot of the groundwork to learn, which was it's a big on ramp to even just figure out how to.
And I wanted to ask a little bit about that too.
Way to do it. Yeah, exactly. And so. And it was a lot. It's like, oh man, you're really comfortable with how you build games, especially for years using this kind of architecture. And now you got to start over from scratch. Like that's not how you solve that problem. Or like, if you're going to do an ECS first, does it even exist? Is there a solution? Do you still have to pair it with a game object in order to get that thing to work? But I think like for us to really get to that, okay, this is it, we're committing to it, and it's going to take some time in order to convert the entire game, was like everybody had to try to solve the game object problem and fail. Like once it's like, this cannot be done unless we compromise our design. So it was because of how far we were in the development cycle, like it's like finish the game, we're at that stage. And so a pivot at this point was going to be dramatic. But it got to the point with the game that we either have to change the game and fundamentally limit all of the cool stuff that we've put on. Like, okay, this can like split bullets, but not more than this many per impact. And it's like, but that was
Right.
the fun of it. Or like,
and one of your hooks is kind of having that customizability where you can like literally combine any different gun parts and like make some crazy contraptions. So
yeah,
it's almost doing a disservice to the game if we, kind of continue along the path that we're going along now. So something, big needs to change.
Yeah.
So
that was it. Yeah.
Yeah. And part of the research is like, okay, well, can I at least cover like the core elements of the game in ECS and just kind of like prove it? So like, hey, you got projectiles as entities. You got this trigger system as entities. What about these other, 5 different scenarios? Like, can they handle this, or the hit markers, the impact effects? What about audio? So it was just like this big list of like checkoffs of like, okay, you do this, or like proof of concept.
It can be done.
Yeah, just like making sure that you can like actually make a complete game and not like, again, spend a bunch of time pivoting to only realize that like something major is like not going to work.
We got to go back.
And so what was kind of your process of learning? Like, did you find it difficult to learn a lot of these ECS concepts, or is it something that you like, maybe there was a little bit of struggle, but then kind of came naturally to over time? Like, what was kind of that learning like for you?
I think just the way of like, just the like ECS in itself, like you have to think different and program differently. Like, and I think that was like one of the complex things of like, okay, well, you're so used to like object oriented and like you're able to kind of throw something together really quick. But the ECS, like specifically the systems, that was like a little bit different, like different to comprehend. But now it's like, okay,
prefer it.
Yeah, but now it's preferred. Now it's like, hey, I really like this. Now I feel like I have a lot more control and things can be very flexible. And I don't have to worry about performance now.
Yeah. And so what was that kind of conversion process like? I mean, it sounds like you've had this game that had been built for like over a year at this point, that, you have a lot of stuff built up and like, maybe even a lot of, existing architecture from previous games. What was that kind of conversion process like? Were you able to translate things over, fairly easily, or did you have to do a lot of, building things from the ground up because now you're doing things in a data-oriented way?
I feel like it was a little bit of both, but it became a little bit easy because like re-implementing the modifiers, we already have like the logic. And then we just had to like kind of convert that logic over of like, okay, hey, this one needs to do like a sine wave approach to it. We did have to convert like mathf to mathematics. We had to do that, but and that one was also very frustrating because like what mathf.radians is different than math.radians, like in terms of or the angle I think it returns.
Yeah. Either you get it back in degrees or radians or
Yeah. So do a lot of those conversions, but after that point, it was just maybe we took like 2 months to kind of convert everything from there.
Wow.
But we couldn't really, like, we didn't want to go the entity graphics route, so we just said, hey, let's still have like a view as a game object, like a view that just kind of follows around the projectile. Or we have area effects, so explosion, we call them environment effects. So same thing with everything. You have an entity as a backing, and all that movement code is bursted and performant, but we still have these game objects because we're using the shader that had like different features for it that wasn't ready for URP.
Makes sense. And
there's a lot of ramp up too, I think. Just in like, aside from just porting, was like, system based versus iSystem, all these different methods that you could do it. And I remember like as a part of that, like once we finally committed, like we had to co-locate in the same place and just sit down because like Kevin had gotten most of the download, and then we wanted to like, hey, like how do we get that ramp up as fast as possible? And you need somebody to be like, we know exactly how to build it in normal Unity land, but like, how do I do this? And it's like, oh, you got to use this system, this system, this system. And so there's like a lot of back and forth and that, but I think it only really like took a week to get like ramped up of just going at it like, okay, implement this system and figure it. And then as soon as you hit a roadblock, how do you know, oh, this is what you do.
Yeah,
that helped a lot.
We brought it back. We got pizza, energy drinks.
Comes full circle.
Yeah.
Well, what was kind of like your strategy of doing that conversion process? I mean, were you just kind of like tackling one system at a time, and like were you able to do it in like kind of an iterative way where you can like test things out in the game still? Or like, I mean, during this week, was the game just like completely broken and you're just like, all right, let's just do as much as we can to get the game back to a working state?
Yes. So the way that our modifiers were before, and here I could share my screen here, just to kind of like show a preview just how like componentized they are. But and this also made the porting a little bit easier too, because so here, let me just show like a good view here. But we have it where we have scriptable objects for everything. So every gun chassis is here. It has a bunch of information. I'll make this one bigger. But we also have a section here. Like we have these things called stat modifiers. So this is just like part, mainly for stats, like your gun magazine size, reload rate, things like that. But we have a separate section here for modifiers. And these are the modifiers that are for every single gun chassis, as well as for every gun upgrade that you attach to your gun. So these are all, like for example, you could go ahead and select any type of modifier. And this has like a class that's back to it. And then whenever you attach it, it goes through a separate flow. So this made the conversion a lot easier because, hey, we're going to just port wave projectile modifier. And this is the one that causes the projectile to kind of go in a wave fashion. So great, let's go ahead and just do this one. Oh, heads up, the knockback modifier doesn't work. Okay, let's go ahead and work on porting that over. So because of the fact that everything was separated out into different classes.
Yeah, it's already kind of a little bit modular to begin with. So like things are kind of separate and you can like, yeah, really focus on like doing things one chunk at a time.
Yep.
It was definitely a branch though for like more than a month. Like it was like where like you could work on content or the map or something like that. But you wouldn't necessarily want to play on the ECS branch because a ton of stuff wouldn't be supported. Or there was some systems in which we would have like both paths kind of worked until we could finally confirm everything was ported, and then we like silo off and delete the old game object path.
Makes sense. Gotcha. And so, yeah, we actually do have some questions that were submitted by some of our Patreon supporters. I want to bring a couple of these in here. So actually from Yoan, who I see is in the chat, was there any feature that was trickier to implement / port in an ECS context? So, I mean, as you're kind of going along through this conversion process, was there like anything that was like particularly difficult?
I think the one that required a lot of iteration was it was kind of like with projectile movement, and it's because of just how the systems are with the idiomatic for eaches. But for example, if you have a projectile that goes and you hit 2 enemies, and then you have another projectile that hits the same overlap one of the other enemies, how do you know if an enemy is is that a legit hit, or did the enemy die from the first projectile? And then on top of that, does it have a modifier to intercept a hit and say, hey, I am invulnerable to that specific projectile hit, and then maybe it voids the damage. So kind of getting those flows working.
Kind of like some of your gameplay rules that you have almost.
Right, yeah. So, but because of the fact with that one, you couldn't like just process it. Like that was like a lot of systems dependent on like 4 other different systems.
I think our first implementation of our stack of like pre-hit this, and then like calculate hit, pre-hit, calculate, and there's like 7 or 8 steps. And initially they were all like in-frame buffer, and I think it took like 4 frames for a thing to happen, and then that wasn't going to work. And then we ported it, and the group system ordering did help us do that, but then we just had to do playback or like structural changes in order to to make it actually work.
Yeah,
like in
yeah,
some of those systems.
but back then we had to do the structural changes, but now
Enableable, yeah. Made
So,
that.
Yeah, but overall, like, because that's something where in the game object land, hey, just register a hit and maybe something listens for that event and like kind of voids it easy. But then with this one, you know, process all the projectile hits. Okay, now, you know, next step type of thing. So
awesome. So we got Danny in here. Welcome in. So got another question here from Patreon. This one's from Simon. So I wonder, what was the biggest challenge when shipping a game running on dots? And are there any things that are impossible in the mono behavior world? So any specific things that you guys have found quite challenging in dots?
The one that comes to mind for me is crashes and debugging. Like in mono, I think a lot of our games we shipped without the fast no exceptions, just because a lot of games are shipped that way. And so you can catch the exceptions, you can log them, you can do analytics, telemetry, and a lot of that stuff. And I think in the very beginning, we had a lot of like, luckily we had testers and we could find a lot of it, but we couldn't test every scenario, just the nature of the game. So there was a lot of like entities does not exist, and then the game just crashes. And then like having to figure out how to make those crash dumps actually useful and back them out. And then if it was in the entity command buffer, like, oh no, there's no, like the crash isn't even useful
like,
for us.
like something happened and it was played back in this entity command buffer. You're like, okay, a bunch of things right to that. Cool.
Yeah. So that was different, I think, in that sense. That was harder. It definitely
so
can be
did
done.
That kind of change like your strategy for your public releases, as far as like creating different build types that might give you more debug information?
Would be nice. We haven't.
but no, a big part of that too was, and I think a lot of this is just a lot of learnings from like all the YouTube, like your YouTube content, even Wayne games. I see in that. But there's overall like a big thing is when to use the end frame buffer versus beginning frame buffer. So a lot of those crashes are like, okay, entity doesn't exist because it was destroyed in the wrong order. So once we've developed like, okay, hey, the beginning of the frame,
right? You have some specific rules of like, yeah, this happens then, and this always happens then, just to avoid those scenarios where, yeah, like you say, an entity doesn't exist when you think it should.
Yeah, I think for that one, and then I mean, in terms of shipping the game, yeah, I believe that's probably the most difficult, because anything else other than that, like build times remain consistent. I think, I mean, of course, the learning curve is there, and I get it too, because even with the learning curve, that was like one of the most challenging parts of it. But I also get it, like, hey, if a lot of people they experience Unity for the first time and you have to use ECS dots, like people are going to be like, okay, I don't want to use Unity, right? So I get
Could
that.
be.
Actually, I see another good question from chat here. So do you access the scriptable objects directly from systems, or do you populate the component with current modifiers? So do you do any like, conversion to blob assets or component data, or is some stuff directly from scriptable objects through a Unity object ref or managed component? Like, what is you guys' strategy for that?
So we're kind of right now in a transition period where once we did do the porting, we just made it where, because the game is about, in here, I could just share screen again.
Yeah, please.
Let's see. Okay. Oh, here we go. So the game is about, whenever you equip different gun augments. So right now, the way that it works is that scriptable objects are here. Designers can go ahead and configure with the modifiers. And then whenever you select a gun from the gun upgrade screen, like that's like such an infrequent event that we don't really care for like any of the hitches or whatnot.
Or change or anything. Yeah.
Yeah, structural change. Yeah. So like during the level up here, whatever you select, this is just going off of the scriptable object. And then once you select it, we go ahead and we add this as a modifier, as a component to the entity that exists. and the but what we want to do eventually, and what we're starting to do with our projectile, with our scriptable objects, is that now we're going through as a baker flow to then already do this conversion, so that by the time that you want to select an augment, like that entity already exists, rather than
because so you're still kind of using scriptable objects at runtime, like that upgrade screen pops up or whatever, and then so like basically all the data is still just directly from the scriptable object, and then as soon as you say like, yeah, I want to apply this upgrade, then it's like, okay, we'll take that data from the scriptable object, convert that into a runtime component, and add it to whatever entity necessary. Is that kind of a basically what you guys are doing?
Pretty much, yeah. Like we found out about Unity Object Ref after like a lot of our stuff had already been kind of created, and so we didn't like, we're just passing around kind of primitive data in order to identify typically. So if it's like, hey, what ID of this like upgrade or chassis or environment effect is it?
Oh, okay.
And then it's just like it's just an array mapping of each of those types of scriptable objects, so that we can, in a managed system, like pipe it back out, as opposed to like, it's effectively the same, I guess, but we didn't know about.
Right. Yeah. It's like you're doing your own lookup rather than using Unity's.
Yeah. And so far, like even with like right now, you went ahead and just equip the weight projectile modifier. And,
okay, nice.
You could definitely change like the different things from like designer, or if you want to really make it, like amplitude a lot higher. And then if you add like a splitter modifier, which allows your bullets to split, which we already have one. So I'm going to just attach this one to it. So if I enable enemy spawning, they should start coming in. Now it's like the split bullets also have the same modifier.
Okay. Oh, okay.
They wave, yeah.
And so this is where things can get really crazy, because like, for example, if you use the explosion upgrade, which this one has an exploding bullets modifier, and you just say, hey, when do you want to trigger? You want to trigger on projectile impact. Explosion area, we can make this really large or keep it as is, and then you attach this. And now every time you hit, it explodes. The splitter ones got removed, but I could go ahead and, for example, if I copy this component here and go to the splitter, because you're only allowed like one magazine in a magazine slot. So these two are both magazines. So I'm going to just paste this element, exploding bullets modifier. So now this splitting magazine has two modifiers, splitter projectile modifier and exploding bullets modifier. So now if I put this here, you see that, yeah, so not only do they explode, but they also split, and those splitters also explode.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we wanted to get it to a point where like, once they're a lot of them are still in progress of like cleaning them up, but like a designer can just go like wild, or like modders someday, it'd be like, hey, everything that is in there, like you could attach it to anything and build whatever you want.
As far as these little kind of custom editor tools that you've created, like how does that all work about kind of equipping the different upgrades and things of that nature? Like, are you just kind of calling into entity functions, or like what are you doing with that?
Like how the like
like the functionality behind them
is just Odin, but under the hood it just like grabs the world and then like calls the normal flows, like adds the components, basically sets up the modifiers for each thing. So this add kind of does the same thing that the upgrade screen would do.
Nice. Yeah, that's really cool. I think having that ability to be able to like modify things in real time, I mean, that's like super helpful from a designer perspective, and like you don't have to like restart the game and rebake all your data or something like.
Yeah, totally. And that's actually, it's something new that we're now having to ramp up on. It's funny, like when we started ECS, 0 bakers whatsoever, and actually the shipped version of the game right now has 0 bakers, just because like it was already so much to like learn and ramp up on all this stuff, and it's like, can we just create entity and add our components? So the first like pass of our thing, we actually like legitimately reached the ECS archetype limit like very quickly, and then like there's no way to expand. I mean, we could you could go into the code and change the limit, but we just actually had to go and fix it. Yeah, I'm sure that the zero bakers is
everyone's shocked about no bakers.
Yeah. It's literally like, and to solve the entity archetype like limitations, we just had to make it more consistent. So we're creating our archetypes and then creating entities on top of that. But now that we had to move to entity graphics and do a lot of other changes for the map, now it
makes a lot of sense to use the
bakers. We're finally
now.
using bakers, yeah.
Gotcha. And I'm actually just kind of curious about, like, have you guys ran into some, I'm sure you guys have, like, ran into some crazy gameplay situations where you have some interesting combination of modifiers that, like, yeah, exponentially increases the number of bullets you have, or like, I'm sure you have some funny stories about like things that you've came across like that.
There's still so much performance work to do, and by nature, since we didn't start like from scratch, we didn't start the game over, we've been slowly porting things over. So there's still crazy scenarios at the late game in which people reach like just so much is going on, and some of those systems that haven't been fully ported are still game object backed, or they're doing instantiates. And even if you have a pool, if it gets to a certain scale and it's calling that many spawns in a frame, like, yeah, there's still performance stuff. But the nice thing is, what in the past it'd be like, okay, how do we hamper the system in order to make this like only spawn a certain amount of things per frame, or put a limit on it? But now we know the solution, and it's just we need to fully port that system into it like a fully entity backed thing that doesn't rely on any game objects, and we can probably solve the problem without having to put a limit on the is there's like our explosions are still game objects with particle systems and they're pooled, but if you're doing like thousands per frame, like or hundreds per frame, like it doesn't matter, it's still gonna it's just gonna chug. So but when we port that system completely over, like all the physics and all of the like the logic can happen ECS backed, and then we can just use particle system emit, or some like the visuals can be different. So we have an approach, but we haven't finished it yet as far as porting it all over.
So is that kind of the point where the game is at right now? Like pretty much all the like gameplay logic and physics is all on the ECS side, and it's mostly just kind of the graphics is
And a lot of the slowdown of the builds that are slowing down, they are pretty much like, we look at them in the profiler and it's just, hey, there's too many game objects being activated. Like there's some crazy builds too. But like right now, I'm on older branch, but even on this one, like the enemies here, they have like a character renderer, and they're using a non. I guess this one is converted to URP, but it's an old shader and it's a sprite renderer. And it's a game object, and the thing that's backing this is an entity. So this is just following this. It's got a collider and everything. But we're working on a separate branch where entity graphics for the projectiles for all of the map, because even the map right now is just sprite renderers. But we have it where going in that route of entity graphics will definitely like resolve a lot of the slow builds type of thing. The ones that people are running like into 10 frames per second.
Yeah. And so what's your strategy for moving over to entity graphics? Like, are you doing a bunch of like just quad renderers with sprite masters kind of thing?
Yep, exactly. We have just kind of converting this into a mesh renderer, and we use shader graph because we needed, what was it that we needed? Oh, there's this, for the shader, there's like this pixel perfect pixel smoothing
jitter, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So we have that, and then we just need to make sure that we have a lot of our other components that act as, or authoring components that act as the like material properties. So that one is a lot better, like on that branch. And we're going more and more for bakers. So we have like a projectile baker that goes through every single projectile entity, and in here it converts all of these prefabs. So like this one has been converted in the other branch to a mesh renderer, And then same thing with this. Right now we're using this as a simple sprite animation. So it just goes through here and goes through every single sprite. Very simple animation. But even this one has been ported into entity graphic route, and this one being a mesh renderer. So during bake time, it goes through all of these prefabs, bakes them, sets it as a separate entity, lookup index via dynamic buffer, so that everything can just not only render much better, but also a lot of our current managed systems will now be able to be bursted.
Yeah, that actually brings up another question that we have from Patreon over here from Vadim. Basically was asking, what is the, how's your resource management and what's your prefab spawn system looking like? I mean, it sounds like kind of in the beginning you were doing things like were you not even really using ECS prefabs at all?
No.
Correct.
Like the current production version of the game, everything is still using game object instantiate for the visual aspect and all that. And there's no, there's literally no bakers. And since it's PC first, like on all our mobile games, we have addressables kind of set up, but like there wasn't a huge difference or gain to like pull these things in or out. So for the most part, it's just a pretty basic spawning setup with prefabs and pooling.
And like then, so yeah, are you guys kind of moving towards that now ECS prefab based approach though?
Yep.
Yeah.
And what has kind of been your strategy for, managing those, like, say, oh, I have, some specific projectile type that I want to spawn, like, how do you kind of store that and look that up and know which one to spawn?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. So we have this, we call them F. So it's funny because we started using entities before entities came around. So we call
name. So it's super confusing in our code repo. It's like 5amp entity is our entire scriptable object backend, in which like every scriptable object in the game is inherited from this thing, which allows us to find it by identify it, like network ID it, and all of these stuff. So it's very easy in between the systems and inherit a bunch of functionality as well.
Yeah, so like all these have IDs, or I mean, we were using string IDs, but now for other burst compatible systems, now you can look it up based on array index.
And so that stuff is just all generated from some code that you have by that base 5amp entity.
Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah. So then, everything inherits from a F entity, like whether it's a projectile entity or a character entity or a unit entity, and it allows us to very easily pull them up. They're all cached.
Maybe we shouldn't call them entities for this talk because
it's been confusing.
Yeah, but our F entity, every scriptable object is one of these. So you could grab anything. If you want to grab this one, you can encode. And then we also have some of like code gen that says, hey, if you want to grab this one specifically and not do like an array lookup, you could grab this one. I think no matter what, it will be an array lookup. But if you just want to like code gen this name, so you could say like this entity dot avia character idle up one hand, like you could grab this index from a generated file.
Yeah, but usually they all connect to each other, so you just kind of like a huge tree. So the character has a whole bunch of entities connected to itself that have its animations and its all that other stuff.
Piqued Danny's ears by saying code gen.
Yeah. Which is like good and bad, because every time like designers create entities all the time, but the ones that are code gen backed, then we have to recompile the game every time they make a new entity, which like if they're like, hey, I'm gonna go make 6 animations for this character, and it's like every time they dupe, it's like compiling.
I see.
Yeah.
So does that compilation process end up taking a little while?
No, luckily, like not too bad. You're like 5 seconds.
Oh, okay.
Oh God. I forgot I have a
things are exploding over there. Got jump scared. And then actually have a Patreon question here from Mr. Awesome, who I also see is in chat here, but wants to know about some of the specific design patterns or practices that you've developed from data-oriented programming. I know it kind of seems like we touched on it a little bit about you know, all the different modifiers, and these are kind of already, you know, separate things, and these can presumably be in their own kind of separate systems. But, you know, is that something that you've kind of like leveraged a lot as some of these like data oriented principles in your game?
I think it really helped with just overall like flexibility, like with a data oriented design in terms of like, hey, you want to go ahead and make this one, like composition pattern is like
composition over inheritance. I feel like the way we used to build was too much inheritance everywhere. That
yeah, I mean, you kind of started mentioning a little bit having your, you know, 5 amp entity and everything kind of like inherits from that.
Our old games are just like smorgasbords of inheritance everywhere that it's bad.
Yeah, so now with components or composition in general, it's just like any type of like thing we need to implement from design. It's like, okay, we have a path, like bar none, and separate system or piggyback off of another one or intercept between two of them. Like the control is there, and that's where it's like pretty relieving. But then same thing goes for performance too. Like we have a path now to make the game completely like entity graphics.
Something I would say that didn't start in the beginning. I mean, I think Kevin had this inkling, but like unmanaged always. It's just like we started by like when we were learning, okay, when do you use a system base? When you use iSystem, and then like you can solve like pretty much every problem in an iSystem. So why? And so that was one of the things that I think didn't take too long, but then we've just shifted to that where it's like it's always an iSystem, and then try and avoid managed code if we can.
Yeah, it's like I mean, I know people say performance first, but now it's like, all right, burst first, manage first. Like, if you can't do it in burst, okay, why? And usually that is either because of maybe particle systems or certain things just haven't been ported, or like we showed you with the sprite renders and game objects, it's like, okay, those can't be bursted. We have a path for that one, but particle systems, I know we would have to, like that one we couldn't burst.
There's a lot of weird hacks. Like our damage numbers are particle systems.
Oh,
we just have like a like one of our designers made the font just has all the numbers, and then it's just there's a particle system for each number, and then they know exactly where to spawn each other. So if it's 3 digits, it's just 3 different emits of whatever those digits are in that location, so that because text rendering is just heavy, and if you're going to be spawning like thousands of damage numbers per frame, like you probably don't want to be using text. There's lots of weird hacks here.
So I did see a comment regarding entity graphics. I thought it was for 3D only. There is a couple of things here that I could show. So the first thing, though, period, is that because this is the release branch, we have entity graphics branch, and this one, I think the starting draw call is it's only. Let me just resume here. Our starting draw calls on our entity graphics branch is like 10, and it's great because like the SRP, the SRP batcher, that just kind of handles a lot of it. Whereas right now, with everything being a sprite render with all the environment, like this is just something that shipped and we really didn't look into it. It's like, okay, these are a lot of draw calls.
We just didn't have time, and so it's just like this is where it landed.
Yep. And
do you have the other one up?
I don't, but I kind of want to pull it out. But yeah, the other one is like less than 10 draw calls.
Like you hung our dirty laundry here, man. You got to pull up the good stuff.
Yeah. But then with this one too is that we have it where, okay, so that's one of the reasons. It's just for rendering, because we've seen this affect mainly min specs, so like Steam Deck. They kind of like struggle with like around this area. But for entity graphics too, it's like even with the projectiles, right? It like the system that moves the projectiles, you can't burst that. So because they're game objects, and we try to do like transform access array like that method too. But no matter what, you have to like restore those positions back. So
right, there's still like conversion back to managed. Yeah.
Whereas with entity graphics, now you don't like. now you don't even need a separate, like, I mean, of course, like you don't need a separate managed system to track anything. You just parent the entity graphic underneath the data component of the projectile, or include it in the same level. But now you don't have to worry about like, okay, well, we can't burst this movement code. So that was like another big benefit for entity graphics for us.
Yeah, totally.
And then for us, it's like with our boundaries, like, I mean, there is no physics 2D. So, you know, we just had to, I mean, we do definitely constrain the player and all the interactions on just the Z position. But
these have all been refactored too. Like these were polygons and then a mesh collider for all of these. And then now we refactored them all to being triangles so that they're convex and that we can actually do a contains. Like there was no way to actually just do overlap. We could only detect boundaries on non-convex for all the boundaries. So we had to refactor those entirely. And now they're all broken apart. Separate system. Because you could break through these. And there's no way for us to like.
You tried hard enough, you could clip through or something.
You get fast enough, you can clip through. And we added new abilities that like give the character like much faster movement in short periods of pulse. And so we had to just fix the boundary completely.
There's another thing that's like, some of your previous decisions were maybe limiting your game design, what you can do with it.
Yeah, totally.
I wanted to ask you guys about the job system. Like, how much are you guys leveraging that? Like, is it only for specific things, or are you using it for like quite a bit of things? Like, how much are you using jobs specifically?
More in the future, for sure.
Yeah, right now our process has been like, okay, iSystem, like in terms of the conversion, all right, iSystem, can we do a burst? Like, preferably yes. If not, then iSystem, and then the next step is like, okay, we could confirm that, hey, this works. It's like we ported the logic. Okay, now we could take the extra step and optimize it further by making it to a job. So that's what we've done already with a couple of our modifiers. Like we have the homing modifier, and we have even the wave projectile modifier. We've ported those into jobs because it just, you know, we have seen that it increases performance a little bit because we could offload it. But right now, everything is not a job yet, but we do plan on, you know, going that route.
Yeah, I found that jobs are definitely like useful for, you know, your heavy things where you're doing, you know, frequent operations on large numbers of entities. But I mean, there definitely is a lot of overhead in scheduling the jobs and all that. So I just kind of, you know, caution to not overuse them.
Yeah, our approach has been like the profiler shows it, and then, or like once it's complaining in the profiler, it's like, oh, that needs a job. And
yeah. I think that's a good way to look at it.
Premature optimization will never get anything done.
Yeah, I know with projectile movements, everything that handles that movement, that one is a job as well. Because I mean, hundreds of projectiles. That's what we just saw. Like, okay, it's definitely needed.
Yeah, definitely. I have a couple quicker questions here from Mr. Awesome that he submitted previously. But how are you guys handling input system? Like, are you kind of are you using the new Unity input system and kind of reading that in from a mono behavior? And do you transfer that over to any data components at some point? How are you tackling that?
That one is, I mean, we historically use Input Manager for, not for NIMRODS, we use Input System, but for our previous projects, it's all been Input Manager. And then some of our other prototypes, we looked into like Rewire and things like that. But we started off with NIMRODS with Input System, and it's actually been really nice, very flexible, and it kind of enables more things for, like, for example, we do like different keybinds. And we eventually want to make it into consoles, and we're thinking about like having couch co-op mode. Like a lot of this just becomes so much easier with input system. And our input system right now is, I believe it's either an iSystem or system-based, but this one just every frame just pulls for all the inputs, and then based on that, it sets whatever component enables on that set per player. That one can't be bursted, but That's what we use, and that's what we prefer to use right now too. It scales, so like it handles all the input and things like that. So.
Yeah.
It's just brute force. Like we have like take all the inputs in one system, and then it puts it on a component that are the things we care about, and then other systems will react to it.
The same approach there.
But we don't have any rebinding or anything. Like eventually we need to do all
that
stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, luckily with the new input system, it's all just kind of like, exposing that to the player, and you kind of have all your stuff backing it already.
And here I could do another screen share. So I pulled up. It's funny. I pulled up the NC graphics branch.
Got to redeem the render or the.
So all right now, so this is an updated branch, but so like for example, talking about the input system, like this glyph right here, the E pickup. This is actually looking at the specific. Forgot exactly how to get to the input system. I think it's here.
You just search like player input. Should be in that folder.
Okay, cool. Not this one. Here we go. So yeah, what we've done is that we've kind of done our own custom glyph system. So we assign this, to a bunch of different controller mappings. Some of these are only like mouse and keyboard only, but we do have, I think it was input key manager data. Yeah. So for this one, we have, we're using TextMesh Pro for this, and we assign it a specific key, and then we just have like a mapping back to the input system key itself.
Okay.
So if you are to switch it to a controller, which again,
it'll pop up with the X button or whatever.
Yeah, it will automatically change because it just
nice
for any input changing.
Nice.
So that makes it a lot easier with the input system itself.
That's awesome.
But yeah, and then even deploying here. So now we have seen it where I think the first time we deployed. So this one is using bakers now. And this is the separate baking scene with subscenes. So, I mean, we do see like only in editor and on runtime, we do see like the live baking process happen. But
this one's been a huge recent exploration to lots of different methods. And I think Kevin's tried like 10 different ways of doing this, and we're still kind of figuring out the best way. But
okay, so now before, right, we were talking about here. So remember it was like 100 draw calls, and then now. The one thing that does break it is the one thing, the items that we have imported, which are the enemies. So
the
like
units,
so like the things that do break it.
But still, it was just like the whole background just showed up in like one bloop, as opposed to like.
Yep. So now the environment is they are entity graphics, and these are like the new colliders. This is what Chris was saying, where
cool
triangles, you could do an overlap check, things like that. But then even with, like for example, this one, well, that's the canvas. But this one now is an entity, and it's ported by Entity Graphics now, so it's no longer sprite render. So this is just our new work in progress branch, and projectiles are at full Entity Graphics. We've just seen like on some systems we've seen like double the performance, which is really good,
especially on low end, like Steam Deck. It'll run pretty well, but then now it'll run really well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, is that kind of your own little quad tree system that you guys have going on there, it looked like?
Oh, that's just the bounding. That's Unity's like default physics debugger.
Okay.
With the bounding box. But you do notice it only shows the ones that are near the player. So there's just a system that enables or disables them based by what grid you're in.
Okay. That makes sense. Have you guys used any like ECS specific tools or libraries any particular things maybe from the asset store or just like some random GitHub repositories, any Unity ECS specific stuff that has been kind of available publicly that is helpful to you?
The samples have been awesome. Just to
for sure.
The like all the Unity samples, or finding any ECS code for ramping up or figuring out like, okay, I need to find a usage of this, and like it's not as easy to Google it because there's just it's not that. It's still relatively new, or the APIs changed so much. So looking at the samples and figuring out like how you're actually supposed to use this code has been super useful. Assets, I'd say, has been kind of tough since it's a newer thing, and it feels like it's much more not opinionated, but like you're kind of building everything from scratch, and so it's kind of difficult. I always found like assets is like it forces you into a pattern,
it's
like
difficult to find a plug and play type solution almost.
Yeah, you have to break it apart to really implement it into your system. So like one example is like in our mono behavior game object world, like a tweening library is fundamental, and like we always just pop in do tween, but like I can't imagine a tweening library for ECS in the same vein in which it would be like super easy, because the way you typically do things is just different.
It's almost easier to just write your own little tweening function and just put it right in the system that you need it.
Right, because like in mono behavior land and async await whatever, like just getting a callback makes a lot of sense, super easy. But I can't imagine the same corollary for an ECS world of like, oh, just tween and give me the callback. Like, not not quite as simple for an entity approach.
Yeah. Daniel wants to know if there's any samples in particular that had been useful to you guys.
Oh man, I just have like all the samples downloaded into one folder, and then I just like rip grep the whole damn thing for like, give me a usage of this damn function so I can see how it's supposed to be used.
Yeah, it's I feel like that's how I find it's like a good way to use, a good way to kind of reference. Like if there's maybe some feature that I haven't used too much, like I'll just like see where is it used in the samples and see how they're using it. And
I think for me
recently, Kevin, you were doing the scene streaming, right?
Yeah, scene streaming.
Oh, nice.
Really good. Yeah, that one was good because we played around with that for a while. Like, do we async load like a bunch of different smaller subscenes, or do we use scene sections? So we like looked at all those examples, and they were super helpful. And then now we just have a lot of different subscenes. So we async loads.
Okay, so that's what you're doing right now is it's kind of having multiple subscenes that you're just kind of loading in the background as the player's moving around.
Yep.
What's kind of your strategy to that? Is like as they kind of move towards the corner, like you'll kind of load in a couple other ones, or?
Yeah, I know
we grid it out, and then it's a super simple one, but we just grid it out, and then we have like a buffer. And then like the recycle buffer is smaller than the spawn, or the other way, the spawn buffer is smaller than the recycle. So
nice. How big is the world in total?
It's pretty big, and it's meant to get a lot bigger.
It's like a couple thousand units by a couple thousand units kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you could tell because we have the minimap here, and the minimap isn't stored as an entity, but it's right here. But you could tell where the chunk kind of stops.
Okay.
But yeah, like Chris said, like we retain it so that you don't go through the churn of loading, unloading. And then of course we just have like the different scenes that are here. Let's see if we can find them, which I think are.
So yeah, do you have some way to kind of procedurally populate all the different sub scenes with the whatever content the designers put there?
Yeah, we have a editing flow. So like right now, if you just open up the main, let's see, it's actually here. Yeah, so this is
a lot of this is all being retooled right now in this branch, though.
Yeah. So, but right now it's kind of like you have like a grid of like the different levels that you want to edit, and based on this one, like for example, if we do, it goes like -4,3, like over here. So like it loads the chunk, you could go ahead and tweak anything you want here, and these are all just authoring components now. So for example, this one is now a mesh renderer with a quad. Simple that. We added the color mesh rendering, authoring, tiling offset, which I believe we could kind of deprecate this and just use the built-in tiling offset. And then we store the pivot here too, because this is just how we determine the ordering, the sort ordering, because mesh renderers, they don't have any pivots compared to sprite.
Right.
But yeah, and then everything gets baked and then just async loaded. And then we do have like other items that we haven't ported yet to Entity Graphics, but we plan on doing it. But for now, we just put them in a separate subscene. We just call it persistent assets. And then because a lot of these scenes, so for example, if we included a breakable in one of these areas, like this one, this is not part of a level scene. This is part of the persistent scene. For example, if you shot this and maybe you took 50% of its health, and then you went away and this level chunk despawned, and then you come back and it's restored at 100% health. Like that's something more like for our designer to be like, all right, well, is this the behavior we want? If not, then we need to put this in like a persistent subscene so that this doesn't get unloaded when the chunk gets unloaded.
Okay.
Or it's just like things that haven't been ported, so we got to do something for now because they still have game objects and stuff.
Yeah, because these are they're still units, unit view control. So these are what we do is that we just attach the baking only entity authoring on it, and then this baker just says, hey, we have a game object that we're going to spawn whenever you get close enough to it. And then it never despawns it.
And this stuff, like, this is what we're just like researching and figuring out now. I think a week ago, these were taking 9 hours to build or something. Like our first try with bakers was like, what in the hell's going on? This, like, our build time went from 30 minutes to 16 hours or something.
Insane.
Like that. It was like, what is...
Yeah. So we also, that was another thing too, is like how big are the chunks that we want to have. We started out with a chunk being 10 by 10. These are 50 by 50 now, but with 10 by 10 chunks, we had like thousands of scene files.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, the building just took 10 hours, 12 hours to build, but it was super fast on device.
Yeah. Once all that baking and stuff is completed, it's just loading that stuff is quick. But
but now we're like, okay, well, maybe 50 by 50 is good because our build times are still not only like an hour, and the performance is still great on device. So it's kind of like in the middle where it's manageable. And then we use right now we're using cloud build, so we just
okay.
Yeah, on device or like on the actual like locally, it's probably 5 minutes or less. But even that previous iteration, even on your machine, right? You left it overnight and it's still done. It's like, we were trying to figure out how to bake the map because in the current production version of the game, the whole map is just baked into a scriptable object, and then it dechunkifies it and then like spawns it dynamically because it's all game objects. So nothing is a Unity thing. It's just serialized, and then we figure out how to load it. But now that it's baked, and like we had to redo kind of everything.
What are you guys using for cloud build? Is it Unity cloud build or is it like a GitHub Actions thing?
We're
just
using
Unity cloud build for now.
Yeah, we've been on Unity cloud build since 7 years now, maybe.
Oh, wow, okay.
Because for our previous mobile games, we just have our laptops, and like building IoT CPP for Android just takes all of the resources out of your laptop. So we kept doing this, and one of our team members just he recommended Unity Cloud Build, and ever since we're like, oh wow, this is such a big time. and then what we
forget,
and then what we've done on top of that is that, and maybe I think other programmers, they would appreciate this, but here's our here's our Discord server. So what we do is that we definitely lean into a lot of automation. So for example, we have like a commit bot that just says, hey, this is anytime somebody makes a commit. Then we also have like a build bot. So you're able to kind of like fire off builds from here. And you're also able to get notified of like, hey, this build got completed, this build didn't. And it just has like the hyperlinks here. We have some like validation things that we want to like that we support, kind of like unit test cases.
Yeah.
And then, but we just kind of like really leverages that automation. If it saves us like an hour, then it's like great. Let's just kind of keep building that up. So it's like JiraBot for channel, for different tasks, and then. But yeah, this has been something that's been really like helping us. Or we have like a Let's Play bot that we just say like Grim posts, and we put a YouTube video, and then that gets posted on the NIMRODS channel. So, or NIMRODS official Discord server. So it really has like saved us a lot of time just regarding the automation flows.
Yeah, no, it seems super nice. How often are you guys running builds? Like, do you guys do every day or not quite every day?
Depending, but usually pretty daily. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just for QA, it's been more like we need to QA it in the build for various things sometimes. So, as opposed to in the editor, or sharing, like we do a lot of sharing of builds with the community to see if they can find bugs or.
And even then, doing daily builds, it doesn't get too costly with build minutes and all that.
It's been on our list. Like we have a Mac Mini in a closet somewhere, and like,
right, yeah,
it was definitely like, oh, whoa, we're gonna have to pay for this now, and like, I mean,
because yeah, I know. I think I was looking at it a while ago, and I think the Mac builds specifically are a lot more expensive, right?
It's definitely very like the infra is really nice, but I don't think we need all of it. Like, but yeah. We just haven't. I'd rather work on the game than.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd just be curious about like how, because I mean, obviously it's saving you time and there's a lot of benefits from it, but it's like, you know, at your team size, I'm just kind of curious about how cost effective it is.
Oh yeah, it's not too crazy. Like I don't think we pay too much, like per month, like in the like double digits max or something.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that's totally worth it. Yeah,
we're not firing them like for every commit. If we had like a full CI pipeline, like we could not use Unity Cloud Build, it would be thousands of dollars. Ridiculous.
Yeah,
but it's only whenever we're ready to build.
That's awesome. Cool. Are there any other technical things that we haven't hit on yet that you guys wanted to bring up?
Through
any particular interesting things that you guys have came across that are maybe a little bit unique to ECS specifically or anything like that?
I think a lot of them we covered. Like we used ECBs like crazy in the beginning because that was like the only way with iterative for each. And I think like enableable components like made a lot of that go away.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We had all the destroy woes. I think I've seen them definitely on your show multiple times. Like, of like you need to very specifically handle this in a certain way in order to. So we have like our destroy system set up.
Yeah. Did you listen to Danny lecturing you about not to use entity command buffers?
Yeah. I think I've definitely seen that mentioned. And like when you're learning, it's like, oh, okay, this is how I do everything, and it was tempting for sure. And more than tempting, we did it, and then I had to refactor most of it.
Have you guys used any AI stuff in your workflow at all to do development or otherwise?
We do. We have like certain behaviors, so a lot of, and they're kind of built around the same way for like modifiers, like projectile modifiers or any other ones. So like the basic slimes they use to follow the player. But we have other ones where they will do like a spiral behavior where it's like bees that follow around the player. But then with that, with the optical avoidance, we use RVO from A-Star package.
That's a package, yeah. Come to think of it, there's a critical package we're using, and it's that RVO, like the RVO Pro.
Oh, okay.
Package. So that like all of our units managing bouncing off each other, and like we don't use the pathfinding part of it just because we haven't had a need for it.
Avoidance and all that.
Yeah. But we're absolutely using. Is it Aaron? His first name was
Aaron Granberg.
Yeah.
That package is amazing, and it's fully ECS or some part of it. I don't know if the whole thing's ECS.
Yeah, I think it's there's a lot of burstable and job stuff in there.
So like this one right here is just the slimes, and it's just follow the player plus the RVO stuff. And then we have it in the next biome where we have the bees, and bees are the ones that have separate behaviors. But then at the same time, a lot of our mini bosses, sometimes we just like create a new system of like, hey, it's just a one-off we need to build for. So like the bees are the ones that have the spiral behavior attached to it. And also part of that plugin, the RVO one, you can make it where their layer doesn't really affect the ground layer. So they're on the flying layer, and that's why they'll push around the slimes, whereas the other characters they push around each other.
Nice.
When you said AI, I thought you meant like generative AI. I was like, I don't think we've used it. Enemy behavior AI. Yeah. All the bosses though are super unique.
Yeah. That's good. Because I know, a lot of the typical vampire survivors is just kind of like, run directly towards the player, or this, you're adding a little bit more kind of, you got to think a little bit more as the player.
Most of ours are just, or the way they're coded is just state machines and like in a component in the system.
So you're using maybe like an enum value or something that you're just kind of changing for the state?
Yeah, pretty much. And then just iterate over all the enemies. So it's just an iterative for each with state machine management, pretty much. For the ones that have, like all of these don't have any AI, their brain is just go towards player. Yeah. But the other ones, we call them brains. They all have.
But some of them do. I mean, like for example, the tower had a projectile.
We can spawn like a Golemite or a Charger or like all of those other, or just skip wave and they'll come up, like the ones that have AI behaviors.
So these other slimes, the stripe ones, they try to do a cutoff one. So they look at where you're moving and they try to.
Oh, okay.
Slightly different.
Yeah, and that also kind of helps prevent them from all clumping together. That's like, because I'm working on a little bit of a survivors game right now, and that's one of the things I noticed with the more like simple, just kind of move to players. They kind of end up like clumping together a lot, and whereas this, you kind of, the different enemy types have a little bit different movement, so it kind of they surround the player a little bit better. Yeah, it's nice.
And then this one for the tank here, the Golemite, it does like a conic effect, but this one is like a sphere cast or overlap sphere, and then we just kind of filter out for that specific section.
I see a question on the trail render, like all the particle systems trail renders, all that. Yeah, that's all game objects still, and we just have like sometimes there's an ECS, like our line renders, we have other things that are line renderer based, and then we have like an ECS system that drives it, but it's still backed by a game object in order to actually render and have the thing. But it allows us to like manipulate the component in a bursted context, but then there's still got to be a managed system at the end that will like propagate that work.
Do you kind of expect that that's how the game will be when it's like, complete and shipped and everything like that? Like you're still going to have game objects for some of the more kind of visual components?
I think that feels like a Unity question.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose.
For them, like if they support everything, hell yeah, we'll move it over. But it's a lot of that stuff is like I don't want to re-implement my own particle system or I know there's VFX graph and there's things that there's other ways, but
it's one of those things too where it's kind of like a balance, because like we could, right now with particle systems, that actually that's another one too, is that particle systems right now we have certain particles that we just spawn one of them and then we just do an emit whenever the explosion occurs. Like that's an example for the explosion particle system. And like we mentioned before, that one can't be bursted. We could implement like VFX graph and go into that one, but I think in regarding the balance right now, I think the particle system emit flows are probably better right now until we see like a big performance drop, and then if we do see that, then we can like look into those things. So it's just like an iterative, like maybe we might benefit from using it. Just we'll see. So that's how we've been attacking everything.
It's awesome. And actually, I want to hit this question from Daniel real quick. Are there any DOTS features? Like, what DOTS features do you guys use the most? And are there any in particular that you're staying away from?
Unity physics definitely is like everything. That was one of the first things I think refactoring from Logic and all that. Definitely iSystems, all the base stuff. Now entity graphics, where we were avoiding at first. We did evaluate like what other, like Nsprite and some of the other stuff that was there, but
okay, nice.
It made more sense to have control, I think. And then, but I wonder what are some other systems that we haven't touched?
I mean, I guess, is it regarding like separate packages? Because I know physics is a separate package, entity graphics is a separate package.
I think just any features in general. Yeah, I don't know if there's nothing coming to mind necessarily. If there's anything that's not off the table.
I guess we stray away from system base. I mean, if that's a feature.
Yeah.
Reach or any of the old stuff.
Right. Stay away from all the old stuff.
There's got to be some new stuff. I mean, we did try like popping in Unity 6 and tried. I saw there was one question on like GPU, like offloading and stuff. We tried the tick box, and it didn't immediately do anything good for our game. So it was like, all right, well, that's going to take more work.
So are you still on version 2022?
Yeah, 3.52. Yeah, it'll be nice to upgrade to Unity 6, but it's one of those things where like every upgrade, every package upgrade, every engine upgrade is just like full of unknowns. I mean, even LTS versions, like when we were showcasing a DreamHack, the night before the event, we did a cloud build, and the cloud build built with 0.02 like version difference. And we're like, okay, yeah, that should be fine. That's only 200 versions away, sure.
Famous last words.
And we started up the game, and it was in the morning. The convention was going to open like in three hours. And we started playing it, and input stopped working. We're like,
no.
Kind of like revert, build again.
Yeah.
So I think Unity 6 would be great. Right now we're using 2022.3.52.
And what entities version are you guys on?
I think right now the latest. Actually, I know. Actually, there was one. I think there was a January 16th update. I don't know if we're on that one.
Yeah, I just saw the other day there was like a 1.3.9 update or something now.
I don't think we might. I mean, we entity graphics and entities, since we just use them so much, like a lot of the bug fixes. All right, right now we're on 1.3.
Point what?
0.8.
Okay, yeah. That's basically the latest version. So nice. Cool. And then actually, before we kind of start to wrap things up, this would be an interesting one to go on. So for your AI state machine, do you kind of have like an individual job for each state, or is it all just kind of like handled in one system and you're doing just kind of like if statements or switch statements depending on the state in your enum or whatever?
Depends on the enemy, but our enemies don't go too crazy. They're pretty simple. So yeah, most of them are just like one big iSystem with switch statements. Yeah.
I could imagine it's probably like, you only have like maybe 2 or 3 states for most of the enemy types.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, they're not making super complicated decisions, and there's only typically
right. It's like
there's not that much targeting.
Follow the enemy, circle the enemy, shoot an attack or something.
Yeah, pause, attack, and then go back. It's
cool.
Pretty simple.
Yeah, keep it simple. I like it.
I think there's some of them where it's like mini bosses. They have a custom behavior, and that actually you have to tie it with visuals. Visuals right now, they're not bursted. So like these systems, they still have the state machine thing. But I think with enemy AI behavior, we haven't really focused on. I mean, we will burst them eventually, all of them. But for now, like it's the projectiles, it's the hits, it's a lot of these triggers. Yeah. These are the ones that we've been focusing on.
Yeah, the only thing annoying with our AI behaviors is like the interactions can interrupt them, and so just handling all of those things. Like they could get frozen, they could get confused, they could get stunned, they could get feared, they could get all those kind of things, and making sure that they come back to a reasonable state, or if they were interrupted in the middle of a cast or something.
So you're kind of doing a lot of your AI logic a lot more like deliberately, like you're kind of like, handling states very specifically, and kind of controlling things that way.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier to debug too. I think we had a really strong grasp of game objects, so we'd go straight for like a more generalized solution typically. But in ECS, it feels like it's easier to go to a non-genericized version to start, and then just get it working.
I think what we say like internally is that, do you see yourself doing the same thing, like, or implementing the same system like 3 times? Like, okay, is there a path to like make a generic component that other systems can use, but not to start at the beginning? Like, just wait until you do it 3 more times.
Not until you've done it 3 times. You're not allowed. Yeah.
Yeah. That totally makes sense. What's been your compile time? Like, if you just make a simple code change and you need to go back to Unity, refresh, like how long is that typically taking for you?
I think 5 seconds or less, or maybe 10.
Maybe like
with domain reload, it's always the
5 seconds.
And does that include like the burst compilation too?
Oh, that's almost always disabled, I think.
Oh, okay. So when you're typically editing, you don't really have burst enabled.
No, it's easier to debug, and like we can't even attach a debugger if we have it on.
Yeah.
Good to know.
We are definitely staying away from aspects. There was a time where when we were doing the porting, we were using that, but then it's like, okay, because I read a comment, I forgot from where, they're saying like they were going to get rid of them. I was like, okay, removing these away.
To Danny's latest question, it's almost all, I think, for each iterative for each is, except for our jobs and the code gen ones.
All the ones that Danny made.
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool.
I think regarding the emergent behavior question, like, do we get that? I think we definitely see them with like projectiles, and mainly the projectiles, those systems in the environment. Mm-hmm. I think with units, they don't really like interfere with each other as much, kind of create those, but with projectiles, they definitely could. Yeah, but even so, like, people are sharing like different builds, and we're like, oh my god, like that looks insane, and it's really cool to see it, and it's even better if it like doesn't lag. We're like, okay, cool, that works. That doesn't slow down. That's great.
Yeah, right now we're actively trying to get our players to send us like games that
find your craziest.
Yeah, like break the game, get it to 1 FPS. We need that build so that we can fix it.
That's a fun place to be in.
Yeah, and some of these are just insane. Like,
whoa.
Like, okay, great. Like, we just pushed out like a hotfix, so like this really enabled more of the performance. Then this person.
And then this is what we're working on. Yeah, this is.
All of these are rockets that bounce around in this containment field that then spawn an explosion, and this explosion is managed.
They also have splitter.
Yeah.
So it's just like this cascading effect of, oh my gosh.
Goodbye performance. Yeah.
And then your game turns into a slideshow.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah,
for now, we'll get there. Because the target, I mean, hopefully this year, but we want to hit consoles as well. And then like our min spec right now is like Steam Deck, but I mean, well, now there's the new Switch, but we wanted to get this game on Nintendo Switch, and so we have to, like, all of this would have to be.
Yeah, I think the Switch is a great platform for games exactly like this. Little indie games and just little. It's a total like fun on the go game, or play in your bed, whatever.
And we need ECS to hit the Switch. The Switch's like specs are not stellar.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and as we wrap things up, I kind of wanted to know, like, what is the future looking like for NIMRODS? I know you guys are launched in early access right now, available on Steam. Link in the description, by the way. But so yeah, and actually one thing I kind of wanted to ask you earlier is like, why did you guys choose to do early access? And so yeah, talk about that a little bit and just what the future holds for the game.
Definitely. Yeah. So we launched in EA with like a ton of content. Like there's hours and hours in there, but it was not even scratched the surface of where we want to get the game to for its 1.0. So EA was not only to collect feedback, but to iterate on it and then build out that rest of the content. So we want to expand and do new biomes. There's more characters and tons of more gun augments. So just experimentation. The dream for the game would be to become one of those evergreen games that you can kind of always just hop in, play around and see what can happen. Kind of like a Binding of Isaac or those games are like have a lot of just infinite replayability. So hopefully that's what we'll get to. But short term is finishing up the game, expanding to console releases as well, and then sky's the limit, hopefully.
Yeah, and a big part of that is just the performance focus, because I mean we're a small team, so like focusing on, so it's a balance, because focusing everything on just new features, people will still complain because their games just run slow, and then same thing where it's just performance, and people are going to be like, okay, where's my updates? So, but we feel like once we do convert a lot of these like slowdowns or convert them to bakers, or just really resolve the performance, that hey, now we can just really go ham on adding in the new updates, new features, new augments. Like we have so many different augments planned, but we just need to kind of resolve this like hiccup. It's in a much better state before the demo, what the demo is at in terms of performance. But hey, at least there is a path right now for us to resolve the slowdowns.
That's awesome. And so how has early access been treating you guys so far? I mean, it seems like you guys are having, you guys have like a good amount of reviews for your game. It seems like people are engaged and interested. Like, have you been getting a lot of good feedback through early access? And yeah.
I think it feels like it's kind of changed where EA really is your launch. And I think that's what a lot of people, like we took that approach too. Like it has to be to a polished state. It definitely has a long way to go, but it has to be to a polished state where it's going to be, worth the value that we're trying to sell it for and everything. And you're lucky if your 1.0 gets as much hype as your EA launch, because it really does come down to like, that's where, you have an opportunity to get the spotlight. So you got to be ready for it. So we launched with that like intention in mind, that like it has been like people are pretty critical. Like even with, it's been really good feedback, but then there's a lot, like the expectations are still really high in early access.
Yeah.
And I think there's still a small slice of people like, I'll wait for it to be 1.0, but for the most part, like it's our launch. But then we want to finish the game to really hit that 1.0, and hopefully it's a even bigger spike.
Yeah, I think part of that too is that like other indie devs, like you have this big pressure, big stress. Like if you've been working on a game for 2 years, how's the game gonna do? Like how much do we have left on the run rates? But now with us, having a great launch with or early access launch with a lot of good feedback, now some of that pressure has been lifted. So it's been great. But now, as Chris mentioned, it's like, okay, on to the path to finish V1 and then consoles. That would be great.
Nice. Do you plan to do like a simultaneous release with PC and console when you hit that 1.0, or is that probably like going to be one step at a time?
Probably one step at a time, because I know it's different marketing beats too.
Yeah.
Oh, true. Yeah.
And right now our current timeline, and it's just tough because part of this is some of this performance is like a research and development phase and just learnings.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do it. So maybe ETA, maybe like in a year. We'll just have to see. It just all depends. But at the same time, we also don't want to be developing something that the players don't want, or if we're taking the game in a wrong direction. So giving them like iterative updates.
That's awesome. Yeah, very excited to see the how early access continues, and as you continue to bring more of these performance improvements and how things go towards that 1.0 release. I'm very excited to see.
Thanks,
all right.
man.
Yeah. So I think we can probably wrap things up here, unless was there any other last thing that you guys wanted to bring up at all?
Oh, just that the community's been awesome, and I really want to thank you guys for putting this show together, and like just everything you guys are doing. I think that we've gotten some of the most help from like digesting this content, and like the communities that have jumped up around ECS and DOTS and just actually figuring out how to solve these problems. It's been huge. So excited to continue to like share our experiences and also just share our woes and troubles.
I think this is all extremely valuable information for people. So yeah, I'm glad that you guys were able to come on here and talk about your experience. And it's been a ton of fun.
Awesome, dude. Keep it up.
All right. So yeah, with that, we can go ahead and end the stream here, and then I can say goodbye to you guys after that. But with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up this episode for the Hot Bath Show. Once again, thank you very much to Chris and Kevin of 5amp for talking about your game NIMRODS and some other stuff with your studio history. Was a ton of fun, and maybe we'll have you guys back on after you guys are in 1.0 and you kind of finish that whole conversion process of bringing everything over to Entities Graphics and all.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah,
absolutely. All right. Well, take care, everybody, and we'll see you in the next one. See ya.